First of all, I am super stoked to be doing this. Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to talk about places that I love. I really enjoy this. So my goal is to just not bore anybody, to share a lot of rivers I care about and love and not bore anybody. My wife explained to me what a humble brag is, and I feel like I might do a little bit of that, but my goal is to minimize number of these humble brags that I do. But I'm really proud of all these places I've been able to go to and experiences I've shared. And also, I'm going to move around the state quickly. And so it wouldn't hurt to open up a map. So if you have a map of Oregon or open up Google Earth in the side or something, I've thought about adding a map to this presentation just so it wasn't so confusing. But we're going to move quickly throughout the presentation. And just quickly, I love answering questions and it makes me feel very important. So please, if you have questions at the end, even if you don't, think of some so my ego feels a lot better. And I kind of want to start with my first river trip in Oregon, and that was on the Illinois River. I was lucky to be able to do a training trip with ARDA, and I sort of fell in love with the Illinois. That kind of brought me to visiting wild places. I loved it because of the flowers, the clear water. I mean, this is one of the photos I took back on that trip in 1998, and this kind of captures that bluish greenish water that the Illinois is famous for. And the botany. I mean, this photo here kind of sums up the Illinois to me. The clear water from up on the side, I can see the rocks at the bottom, the clear water, and also an iris. And when I was 20 years old, I didn't believe an iris could grow out of the ground in a natural habitat. I thought they were growing on farms. So to see this was really, really special to me. And we'll come back to Illinois at the end, but this was my first wild trip here in Oregon. Do we know that people can see the slides, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So Eric and Aaron asked me to talk about Oregon's wildest trips, and I thought about this quite a bit. Are these like the ones that are deepest in the wilderness? Are these the ones that are in the most challenging Class 5 waterfalls? Like, is it the most hair adrenaline type thing? And I've always had my own definition of what wild is, and that's what we're going to kind of go off. And wild to me involves just it not being on the map in a way, that there's challenges you can't really expect. So to me, wild is a trip like this. Here we are on the Chetco River. This photo to me evokes emotion inside of me of a morning waking up. We got rained on all night. We were all wet. We were all cold, and we knew we had a lot of river to do that day. This feels wild to me. Or a river where flips happen and things go wrong. Or this was our way into Josephine Creek, where we were 7 miles from a paved road, got this car stuck in the mud, and spent 2 hours clawing dirt out with our fingers because we didn't have a shovel. Or a river that you don't know the way down. You have to portage walking over logs, or you run into logs and have to figure out how to solve this problem. Or this, we'll come back to this one later. This was on our way into Baldface Creek at 5 in the morning. Our friend Barefoot Brad, the wheel fell off his truck as we were driving to Baldface Creek. Or tears in a boat, or something like this, where this was that same morning where we woke up cold in the rain, and half an hour into going down the river, we wrapped an inflatable kayak on a rock. And this to me, this is wild. We're in a remote place. This isn't a gimme. There's stuff going on. But what I personally love about this trip is like these moments are special and they're fun. This is that same wrap from my friend Courtney and Emily's perspective. They took a selfie. They were happy. We were happy to be out there, even though it was a rough time. At the moment, there's some positives, and we really enjoy this kind of experience. And here's my friend Aaron again, like really pinned in a ducky, but just happy to be out there, and another thing that we solved. So to me, wild is just, it's not a gimme, it's challenging. And that's my definition. That's what we're gonna go with moving ahead. And I wanna start with the Owyhee River. Here we are, the Owyhee River starts in Idaho and a little bit in Nevada, and then flows through a lot of Oregon. And it's just a really remarkable, rugged place. Here we are in Iron Point Canyon, rafting down the river. It's a trip that, you know, it's wild in the sense that just getting there is an adventure. Just getting to Rome, Oregon, or wherever you're going to put it in is an adventure. And you're really in the middle of nowhere, but it's one that anybody can do and appreciate. Some of the best parts are hiking. Here we are hiking up to Lambert Dome, and there's some really cool formations on the way up to check out, things you wouldn't expect in the desert. And when you get to the top of a place like Lambert Dome, this hopefully you feel the sense of camaraderie that people have. Like there's a genuine feel of happiness that as a group, we all made it to the middle of nowhere, Oregon, got on rafts, floated down, got to camp, and hiked up to this remarkable place. This to me is wild. Just a great expanse. Here we are again camped in Iron Point Canyon. And one of the really special things about the Owyhee is the night sky. If you look at a map of Oregon, you know, you find a map of the US and you look at this part of Oregon, you'll rarely find anywhere else in the US with this much area without a town. The night sky is stunning when you go down the Owyhee River, and something really special. And this was a special moment I was able to capture with some friends. This was a special sunset on the Owyhee River. I tried to make this photo better with Photoshop and I couldn't. The sky actually looked like that. And it was after, you can see the chairs are down on their sides because it had just dumped rain on us, and we moved the chairs over so the rain wouldn't collect in them, and we were given this wonderful light storm afterwards, or sunset. Well, after that particular Owyhee trip, I found out that there's a river called the Donner und Blitzen that was flowing nearby. And here we are cleaning the groovers in Burns, Oregon. And I tried to convince a friend of mine to go paddle the Donner und Blitzen. And for those of you who don't know, it flows through the Steens. It only has water a handful of days of the year. It's one of those that is only legendary among boaters. And we went to go do it. We made a bunch of efforts, and we got to this sign and couldn't make it in. So I'll come back to the Donner und Blitzen later when we actually do make it in. But after the Owyhee, we tried to make it here. They're very close to each other. And here's a photo I took from that first trip. We went to the takeout of that river and grabbed a quick photo. Another great trip I did with my friend Tim Palmer, who I think is listening now. We did the Wenatah River as part of an Oregon Field Guide episode a few years ago. The Wenatah flows through the Wenatah-Tucana Wilderness and starts near the Washington border. And we hiked about 5 miles in. Here's some videographers from Oregon Field Guide. And here we are put in. I mean, this is a tiny stream. I think we did this in July, and there was almost no water. We didn't even know what the water flow would be. There's no gauge on it. And again, to me, that's wild. We hiked in 5 miles in the hopes that we could find something to float, and we had 3 days of floating ahead of us. And some of this meant just getting out and lowering our boats down, but eventually we had water, and we got to enjoy this really beautiful canyon that very few people see. And in July, I think we only saw 2 other people, and they were hiking up the trail to do some fishing. So it was really a special trip to see a wild place. Moving on to a place that was a passion of mine. We saw this photo earlier, Baldface Creek. I had tried to go and to paddle it in the late 90s and got lost. And my friend JR and I tried to go in, but Barefoot Brad's tire fell off. And we went back and got my truck and tried to make it to put in, but we ran into snow. So we returned back. And 2 years later, with another friend of mine and Joseph Vale, we hiked in a different route when there was less snow. And luckily Joseph was there. Joseph is with KS Wild. And I think he joined us for the hike in just to make sure we didn't get lost. And we made it down to this tiny creek that's a tributary of the North Fork of the Smith. And this really is one of the most remarkable creeks in Oregon. I'm with my friend Daniel. He's not a boater. He's a photographer. We didn't expect there to be this much water. We thought we were going to backpack down the river and float out the North Fork of the Smith, but the river was higher than we thought. And so you can tell he's not thrilled to be boating, but he's doing his best. And sometimes we paddled down the river. Sometimes we packed our kayaks in our backpacks and backpacked down. We crossed back and forth across the river. We spent the night along the river. So a good kayaker could easily do this trip in a day, but because we were going super slow, we took our time. And Daniel, he didn't like boating so much that he would rather scale cliffs than go paddling. But at times we were eventually forced to float down the river, which I was really happy about. He was not, which meant some portages and some challenges. And here he is again. And this is one of my favorite parts of the river. This might not look special, but to me, this place really is. That rock behind him is it's a type of serpentine. I always get the geology wrong here. It's a type of serpentine or serpentinic rock. People call it peridotite. if you break it in half, it's greenish blue, but it weathers brown. And so most of the river had this brownish rock that we're going to see a lot of in my presentation. But at a very distinct place, it changed to a more of a rainforest type feel. Although both areas get tons of rain, I'm going to switch them back and forth between the two. There's a distinct spot where the soil changes from this brownish rock, where even though it gets tons of rain, a lot of plants don't grow, to a very lush rainforest. And we floated down, here's some more of this lower part of Baldface Creek, down to where it meets the North Fork of the Smith, another remarkable river we'll talk about in a little bit, and finished up. There's a big class 5 downstream that we'll show some photos of later on. Next up is the Crooked, and I'm taking you now to Central Oregon. And what I'm kind of doing here is trying to do these in sort of the order that I did them. And the Crooked River, if you paddle it, it's generally a day trip. You do about 25 miles, which is a lot for one day, but it's hard to camp in here. And so here we are above Smith River State Park in some pretty continuous rapids. And here we are in the park itself. Those of you that have been there probably recognize, you can see rock climbers climbing up on the wall. And it was a very surreal experience to watch rock climbers and then have them watch us float through to the park. The rapids are named just number 1, number 2, and number 3. This is number 1. And this is a 14, that green boat in the center is 14 feet, and it just gets buried in a big hole. And this is the bottom of the biggest rapid called No Name, a big class 5. Again, it's number 1, number 2, number 3, and then No Name, a big class 5 part way down. Here's my friend Jesse running the bottom part of No Name. It's a very intimidating rapid, and not that many people do it because there are so many difficult rapids, but the reward is this really special canyon. And those of you that live in Bend probably recognize these bridges. You know, normally you look down, there's hardly any water, but maybe like 5 or 6 days a year, there is water in this river and we're able to float down it. And we're just basically rewarded with amazing beauty and fun continuous whitewater. Here we are, this is a place called China Dam. And at this point, this is why people don't do it very often as well, and why it's not an overnight trip. You either have to hike a mile or so out from here up to that rim with all of your gear, which is tough, or run this rapid that I would call class 5 and like kind of sketchy class 5, then continue downstream to Portage, this dam, and then you have to take out on Lake Billy Chinook, which is either 8 miles of paddling or somehow get towed. So an opportunity to paddle the Crooked is something very special here in Oregon, and it is truly one of its most wild rivers in my mind. Another favorite that's not a multi-day, this is a day trip for me, and this is in my backyard. This is the Middle Fork of the Hood. Not a very well-known fork. Few people have paddled it, and the whole river right side is the Parkdale lava flow. And it's hard to tell from here, but you're paddling next to a lava flow. There's steep, continuous rapids. And the reason people don't paddle it is there's just a good amount of wood on a continuous river. And this is my friend. I mean, he's basically Captain America. He can do this in hard shell. I would not make it in a hard shell on this run, but my friend Adam is basically Steve Rogers. So he's able to pull it off. The rest of us were in inflatable kayaks. And one of the reasons I love inflatable kayaks is they give you the flexibility to duck under logs or jump out really quickly when there's wood. So a river like this that would be terrifying in a hard kayak is actually somewhat manageable in these little inflatable kayaks. Here's another photo of my friend Anna about to duck under a log, which would be difficult in a hard kayak. Next up, let's go back to Southern Oregon, and next to Baldface Creek is Rough and Ready Creek. And this creek has probably captured my attention as one of the wildest trips of all time for me. If you look at it here, we're basically off Highway 199 looking up. It doesn't look like much. I drove over this many times before I thought, hey, let's go up there and maybe paddle it. And this is for my first trip. There's my friends JR, Super Kev, and Dan. And I talked them into doing it. Here's a different trip with JR and Lori where we went in to do it. This is our photographer, Daniel, this is the guy who did the Baldface Creek with me. He was our photographer he's a photographer, and he joined us and took some photos. There's another trip, my friend Chrissy, when he carried hardshell kayaks in. and another trip in with my friends Nate and Rygide, where we walked through snow and really went high up on Rough and Ready Creek. And I have fallen in love with this place and gone through a lot of difficulties to access it. And Rough and Ready Creek isn't a traditional trip, and that's why I consider it such a wild trip, because you can't park at the top and park at the bottom and just go boating. You park at the bottom, you hike half a mile to even get here. You have to cross the river, and then you have to just bushwhack up as far as you're willing to bushwhack up until you're ready to paddle. Every inch you paddle, you walk and more. And it's hard work. It takes like a love of the place and the sport. And at some point you just say, we're putting in. And this is for my first trip. We just fell in love with this place. The brown rock, the cool vegetation. This is a place we call Island Rapid that is just really special to me. I don't know why I love this place so much. This exact place on this exact river. And here's another trip in of us carrying hard shells up there. This is that same spot where my friend Dan carried he was wading the river. The river was higher. In another trip, we had to go up and again hike up. And this is one of the bigger rapids where both JR and I had a pretty similar result happen to us. We both ended upside down and hitting our heads. But the beauty here is remarkable, and again, a place I consider unmatched in terms of its wildness, in terms of all the challenges that going into seeing this place. There was a trip where we hiked in the snow even to go run the South Fork of Rough and Ready Creek, and went as high as we could before putting in to just an incredibly magical day of paddling through big flakes of snow. And this is one of my favorite days of kayaking ever. Although that morning I wasn't, of course, looking forward to it. And as you can see, it's just a lot of pain and suffering to access this creek that very few people have seen. This here is where we camped on one of our trips where we got the highest in. And this ridge is the border between Baldface Creek and Rough and Ready Creek. And so to the right, if you walk down the hill, you're going to go into Baldface Creek, which takes you into the Smith River drainage and ends at Crescent City. If you go down to the left, like we did, you're going to go down to Rough and Ready Creek, which is going to take you into the Illinois and then into the Rogue and out of Gold Beach. So this ridge separates two of the major watersheds and two of my favorite watersheds of all time. And here we are at Rough and Ready Lake. This is where Rough and Ready Creek starts in the Kalmiopsis Wilderness. And this was the final descent that I did with my friend Nate and Ryan down in to run as high as we ever got on Rough and Ready Creek, where we got to run some pretty nice rapids. And we think that very few people have ever been in. And one of the special things about this place, and hopefully you can tell my passion for how much I love this creek. I'm spending the most time on this creek because it's sort of my wild place, is because of the lack of nutrients in the soil, the plants have adapted to the soil. And this is one of the adaptations. This is the pitcher plant, or Darlingtonia, which basically digests insects to provide nitrogen. And so there are more rare and endangered plants in this part of Oregon than anywhere else. Well, let's move on from Rough and Ready Creek. I could literally talk about Rough and Ready Creek for an hour, and I'm not going to. Let's go back to Idaho, and we're in Owyhee territory right now. And the North Fork of the Owyhee starts in the Owyhee Mountains, flows through the Owyhee Wilderness in Idaho, and then it comes out right about here. And this is where you would put in to paddle the North Fork of the Owyhee. Again, this is one of those rivers that only sees enough water to paddle 3 to 8 days a year. We just happened to be in the area at the right time, and we saw there was flowing. And it's just a remarkable little creek, although it's a river. Starts in Idaho, flows into Oregon. So at this point, we're in Oregon, and we had this place to ourselves, steep white water like this, and these beautiful walls coming up. This is where my friend Dan and Dougie got in a big fight about how to fix this problem they got themselves into, and I just enjoyed taking photos of it. And here they are running a little mini drop. And this is the final little gorge as you head down to Three Forks on the Owyhee River. And here we are at Three Forks. A lot of people who do the middle Owyhee put in here and take out a roam, and it was pretty unique to be taken out here. And there's several, you can do the East Fork, you can do the South Fork. There's different ways to come down to this place by river, but the adventure I've had and I think has been special was on the North Fork of the Owyhee. Well, after that, it just turns out that the Donner and Blitzen had water. So we went back to see if we could solve this gate problem. And through some very creative phone calls, we found a legal way to get a key to this gate. And we're able to go and paddle the Donner and Blitzen. And so now we're in the Steens. We're really close to the Owyhee. The Steens have been protected really well through a combination of wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. The Donner and Blitzen that we're on here is protected as wild and scenic, as well as pretty much all of its tributaries. And we were lucky to spend a night in here, do 2 days, and take inflatable kayaks down this just really cool canyon. And I understand that the first time it was ever run was in a drift boat by Prince Helfrich. I don't know if that's true, but it must have been pretty high water to get a drift boat down this. And here we are looking up the Little Donner and Blitzen. Again, this is a wild and scenic river protected by the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Next, I want to go, so we were just in southeast Oregon. I want to go to northeast Oregon, and this is the town of Imnaha on the Imnaha River. The Imnaha starts up in the Wallowas in the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and the people have paddled up there, and it looks phenomenal going over granite boulders and granite drops. The part that I did that I thought was really cool, we went downstream from the town of Imnaha, saw some cool, some cowboys being cowboys, which is always cool. Went as far as you can drive and put our kayaks in. And right here, we're about 4 or 5 miles from the Snake River and Hell's Canyon. And this was, it was a lot of driving to get here. I mean, from Hood River, I feel like I drove like 8 hours just to get to this spot. It's in like the far northeast corner of Oregon. But we got to paddle this beautiful little canyon with class 3 and 4 rapids. Nothing was hard for most whitewater paddlers. Beautiful canyon. You can see there's a trail that parallels it. The trail comes in a little bit later. I had a great time paddling. And then here, this is where the Imnaha meets the Snake River in Hell's Canyon. And we spent the night on the Snake River, saw jet boats go by here and there. And then the next day we're able to hike back out. So a really unique trip, driving to the end of the road, paddling down, and then hiking back out where we paddled down. And something I would highly recommend to anybody who's willing to put in the effort. So here are a few more photos from Rough and Ready Creek. I just wanted to share. And one of the things about Rough and Ready Creek is that a lot of these creeks in southwest Oregon are threatened by the Port Orford cedar root disease. So if we drive on the roads when they're wet, or we hike on the roads when they're wet, we can spread the Port Orford cedar root disease. So a lot of these places have gates across them that keep us from driving on. This will be open in the summer, but when we paddle, this gate is closed. Oops, I went to the end. Oh man, hold on guys. I pressed the wrong button. I gotta move forward here. This is like a really cool review of everything. Wow, we've been through so much together. So I want to finish up with, the Rough and Ready Creek to me personally is the epitome of wild in a lot of ways. And that word keeps coming up in this presentation because it's Oregon's wildest trips. But I want to talk about 3 that are, I think, the most special, and they all happen to be in Southwest Oregon. Southwest Oregon is the place that brought me to boating on the Illinois, and a place I've just fallen in love with. So I'm going to finish up with my 3 favorite wild rivers down there. This is the first one. This is the North Fork of the Smith River, and where we're at here, we're standing in California, looking up at Oregon, and right about where I can't tell you exactly where the border is, but it's in view of us right now. And there's also a change from a very dense, lush forest to that brownish rock we talked about earlier. And so if you're floating down the North Fork of the Smith in Oregon, it's like a jungle rainforest almost. As soon as you get to the California part, it feels like a desert because there's a geology shift. And it does happen right at the border. And so those of you that paddle the North Fork of the Smith in California, you'll recognize this is the put in. This river is remarkable. And this isn't California's wildest river, so I'm not going to go on about this river. But goes to a beautiful canyon with beautiful white water, that brownish rock we talked about, that peridotite. Here we are looking actually down Peridotite Creek into the North Fork of the Smith, right around where this place called Waterfall Alley is. And here's a place called the Grotto. I mean, those of you that paddle the North Fork of the Smith know this place. You can paddle behind this beautiful waterfall. But if you want to paddle the North Fork of the Smith in Oregon, it's a whole different affair. This here is after 2 hours of driving, getting lost, using GPSs, needing a big truck, pulling out the chainsaw, we found this spot. And this is the beginning of the hike down to the North Fork of the Smith in California, or in Oregon, I'm sorry. And it's about a mile of like basically route finding and bushwhacking. And once you get to the river, the first mile or so is just a lot of this, portaging over log jams. It's semi-painful. And here we are, like a log fell across the river, we had to get out, walk around it, put back in, another log jam. I mean, we probably did 20 of these just to make the first mile and a half. And then once we got there, we found this remarkably beautiful special river. And I wish I was a better photographer. When I took this photo, I thought I was going to go on my wall at home, but the lighting didn't quite turn out. But this one did. This was on the cover of the American Whitewater calendar a few years ago. And just a really remarkable place. This is North Fork Falls, a legitimate Class 5 on the upper North Fork of the Smith. And a reason a lot of people maybe don't paddle it, it's a big rapid. And that upper North Fork of the Smith is a true wild adventure. It's like an Indiana Jones style adventure just to paddle it. Those of you interested in like a wild rafting trip, and the trip that got me started in boating in Oregon, this is the Illinois. And I think if you think of a commercial rafting trip, to me, this is the most wild thing out there. It has the clear water, the fun rapids. Here we are at Fawn Falls, legitimate whitewater. This is the famous Greenwall Rapid. This rapid is no joke. Here, my friend Matt is stuck in kind of a precarious spot halfway down Greenwall. Here's my friend Ian, who claimed he didn't almost flip, but I have the photo proof here that he did almost flip. And submarine hole, this is the first place I ever saw a flip on the Illinois River. This to me is just, it is the wildest rafting trip out there. I love this place, and not because of the whitewater. I love it because of the waterfalls coming in all the way down, the clear water. And for me, like I love views like this, but the botany is something that's really special. I believe this is a California lady slipper. This is an orchid you'll find if you just look closely up some side tributaries. Or the butterwort. This is another insectivorous plant. If you look on the leaves of this thing, there's the exoskeleton of insects that it's digested. Again, it's an adaptation to the lack of nutrients in the soil, a lot like the Darlingtonia. And so here we are across from where Indigo Creek enters the Illinois. There's a ton of Darlingtonia or pitcher plant up on the banks there. But finally, I want to get to the Chetco. And for those of you that know me, know that this is sort of my special place. And I always, like, my wife's always like, well, I thought that was your favorite river. No, that's your favorite river. I have a lot of favorite rivers. And I have to say, the Chetco has an incredibly special place in my heart, maybe my favorite river. And if I was to pick the wildest trip in Oregon, it would be a toss-up between the Chetco and Rough and Ready Creek. The big difference is you can only run Rough and Ready Creek a handful of days of the year, and it's incredibly difficult to get it put in. It's actually reasonable to get the put in for the Chetco. My first trip, here's Barefoot Brad was driving us there. We're at Michaela Branch on the Chetco, we're on the Illinois River right now. This is another one of those Port Orford cedar gates that I mentioned. We thought that gate would be open, but because it had rained, they kept that gate closed to protect the area from the Port Orford cedar root disease. So we had to start our trip by hiking up a few miles and a few thousand feet to a place called Chetco Pass. Here we are at Chetco Pass. This was about a day of hiking. Here we are looking down from Chetco Pass at the river, and it took us another brutal day to get from here down to the river. And this is because the trails just weren't cleared, and we had to just bushwhack our way down until, here's my friend JR. This is the moment we first saw the upper Chetco River. We're in Slide Creek here, and we made it down Slide Creek, and we put in this evening and paddled a few miles. And this is from our first trip. It's a place I just fell in love with. And those of you that know me know I love going back here next year. The water clarity is unreal. And our friend Billy on that first trip took an alpaca, which sort of inspired me to design new gear that would allow us to run a trip like the Chetco in a responsible way. And now we have all kinds of specialized gear unique to running trips like the Chetco, super light stuff that we take with us. Because even though we don't hike into our Chetco Pass anymore, because the Siskiyou Mountain Club opened up a new route through Babyfoot Lake, we go in that way. And here's my friend D-Rock. D-Rock is one of my buddies I've done the Chetco with. And that those flowers in the foreground, I believe, are Lee's Lewisia. It's at least a Lewisia, and an incredibly rare flower. Like, this is a huge find for us when we do something like the Chetco. Here we are still hiking in. We're about mile 8 here, and that's Bailey Mountain up to the left. And this is the beginning of what we call Torture Mountain. That's not a true name. You won't find it on the map. But at this point, you've hiked 8 miles and you're exhausted. And we have a 2,000-foot descent on uneven rocks. It's painful. But it's also a place where we see the Kalmiopsis flower. So the Kalmiopsis flower is an incredibly rare flower, generally only found in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. The Kalmiopsis wilderness is named after this flower, and there's only a few places you can even see it. And we do go through a patch of it on our way down to the Chetco River on the Torture Mountain Trail. And again, please, the Torture Mountain Trail is not the official name. That's just what you call it when you're exhausted. And on the Chetco, there's beautiful rapids in a beautiful place, a lot of challenges, portages. This is a 30-minute portage. And the clarity of the water is unreal, both here and on the Illinois. And it's a thing my friend Tim says when I asked him about the water quality, he said, that's the color rivers should be. And I think about that all the time when I'm up here. This is what our rivers should look like. And this, to me, this is after hiking in 10 miles, floating down through a place called the Magic Canyon, being with close friends. This is what a wild river is to me. So that's all I have for you guys. And I just want to reiterate, I know people are going to say, I thought the Chetco was the best river. It is literally a two-way tie for me between the Chetco and Rough and Ready Creek, with like the Illinois slightly behind. So thank you everyone for listening.
All right, Eric, we're going to turn things over to you now.
All right. All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Zach. That was a really fun trip around some of Oregon's wildest rivers. I am the Wilderness Program Manager at Oregon Wild, and I've been here for the last 20 or so years, working to protect Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters. And one of the things Zach mentioned is the designation of a wild and scenic river. It's one of the tools we can use to protect, whether it's our clean drinking water or old growth forests that store a lot of carbon, or it's wildlife habitat, or it's recreational activities like kayaking or rafting. A lot of different good reasons to be protecting these rivers. And the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is a great way to protect those values. So as we look at our rivers, we all have a lot of different reasons we love rivers. One, for me, especially at a time like this, I have a newfound appreciation for rivers as offering some solace and peace in a crazy, stressful world. Other times it's more of an adventure connection with rivers. But and for some people, your connection to the local river is that's where you get your drinking water. So there's a lot of different reasons we love these rivers and why we want to see them protected. And when it comes to protecting Oregon's rivers, there are a lot of different types of designations we can use for protecting our public lands and rivers. The gold standard is the wilderness designation. Right up there with that is National Park and Wild and Scenic Rivers, but there are all kinds of other designations that our public lands get, riparian reserves, late successional reserves, this, that, and the other. All of them have some amount of loophole or not, but we have found the Wild and Scenic Rivers designation to be a great tool for protecting rivers for future generations of both wildlife and people. And it takes an act of Congress to protect and designate a wild and scenic river. So what is a wild and scenic river? What does it mean? What happens when you designate a wild and scenic river? So basically, you have a corridor along the river that is protected. Normally, it's about a quarter mile on either side of the river that gets protected. In some cases, you get a double wide corridor and double the conservation, so half mile on either side. We have a couple of rivers that have that double wide buffer in Oregon, 15 Mile Creek and Elkhorn Creek. Most of the other ones are a quarter mile on either side. Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and what does it mean? So basically, you get a protected corridor along the river. And to the question of what's allowed in a river, what's not allowed, generally you can still go hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, rafting, canoeing, and all those low impact recreational activities are still allowed, encouraged. Restoration is encouraged. Lots of good things you can do. Not other than some very rare exceptions. You're not going to see a lot of aggressive logging, so not a lot of clear cutting of old growth, not a lot of logging roads being built and all the erosion that comes with those. Wild and Scenic River corridors tend to be pretty well protected. There are no dams would be allowed. So something we saw a lot more of a number of decades ago, but might be seeing more dam proposals. We saw one come across my desk today for a tributary to the Santiam River. And so, so that's kind of what's allowed and not allowed. And then you have sometimes the streams will flow, primarily these days, the rivers that are designated as wild and scenic flow through public lands. If they do go through private lands, you don't get that same protected corridor. That is more just for where there's overlap with public lands. Here's a map of where we've got wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. You can see they're pretty spread out. There's a good bit of geographic diversity, not too many in the Coast Range. The quick key to this, you can see the light green is national forest, the tan is BLM lands. And you'll notice a few little oddities here. The blue lines, the wild and scenic rivers that have been protected. The most recent victory was in protecting 250 miles of rivers almost exactly a year ago now. And you can see a couple of those clusters, sort of a high density of designations in Southwest Oregon. Some of those are tributaries to the Rogue River. Others are tributaries to the Elk River. So that was the most recent designation. Overall, if you look at how many rivers have been protected, what percentage of Oregon's rivers have been designated and protected, only about 2%. So a lot of really important rivers for whether it's for clean drinking water, or recreation, or wildlife. There's a lot more work that and important rivers that deserve to be protected. So that brings us to sort of the historic opportunity at hand right now, which is the potential for protecting of additional wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. We're very excited about this at Oregon Wild. As you can see from the headline here, Senator Wyden announced his plans to designate new rivers in Oregon, and that was last October. Since then, he basically put out a call for nominations, and folks from pretty much across the state nominated rivers. There were 15,000 nominations from over 2,200 different people. That included everyone from Native American tribes to classrooms. Here in Bend, the Pacific Crest Middle School 6th graders nominated our local Tumalo Creek. We've had breweries who, if you know good beer, you need good clean water for beer. So our breweries have been great advocates as well. And then rafting guides have been nominating rivers. So folks from all walks of life, all corners of the state have had ideas. There have been a couple of town halls. Here's a picture of one that Senator Wyden had, again, kind of doing their due diligence to see what rivers they think make the most sense for legislation to protect them. And so that's the opportunity at hand. If we're able to show enough support for these rivers, we're optimistic that Senator Wyden will hear that support, turn it into legislation, and protect these rivers for future generations to enjoy. How can you get involved? You can call Senator Wyden. His number is right there. And if you've never called an elected official or a congressional office before, don't be intimidated. No one's going to grill you. There's hopefully just a friendly person there who's going to take a sentence or two note from you and pass that along to the senator. So you don't have to have all your statistics and figures just right. Maybe it's you want to write a letter to the editor, another great way to weigh in. For those of you who have a little extra time on your hands during quarantine, that might be a great way to spend it. And these things work. It may not feel like it every time, but I talk to congressional staffers and members of Congress, and they pay attention. They're looking every day at who's making phone calls, who are they getting letters from, and so don't underestimate the power of the people here to protect rivers. And go rafting with Zach. We have a lot of great businesses that support protection of our rivers. Zach and Northwest Rafting are among the best. Zach has been to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress in support of protecting rivers, and really goes above and beyond. And clearly, he knows a lot of great spots to go, whether it's the super adventurous or the medium adventurous. I would encourage folks to get out on the river with Zach. And the more you know Oregon's rivers, the better an advocate you'll be. So once everything opens up, hopefully folks can book a trip with Northwest Rafting and have some fun on the river. I am certainly looking forward to getting out on the river and out on the trails in any and every way possible once we're through the other side of this. And then lastly, become a member of Oregon Wild or any other organization around the state that is working to protect our rivers. We have a big coalition, great to support them. And it really does make a difference. Nonprofits exist primarily by grants and donations. So there are lots of other great ways to get involved as well. But this is just a little bit of a sampling for you here. And that will kind of round out my short pitch there. So I think it sounds like while I had my glitch there, you started with some questions, but feel free to continue with questions regarding the campaign and effort to protect more rivers around Oregon, or for Zach about any of his specific adventures and recommendations.
Yes, I have been collecting questions. This one's for Zach. My husband and I are over 65, very fit, and love adventure. Which trips would you recommend? Wilderness is important. We like hiking, birding, botany, and geology, but not so interested in the Class 5 experience. And a couple other people had chimed in that they were maybe not as into the rapids, but were looking more beginner level trips.
So I'm in the same place. Like, I started by getting into rapids, and now I'm more into the place, and the rapids are just kind of almost in the way of getting down the rivers. I mean, I like rapids, but I'm all about the place. And I think the two that come to mind for beginners are the Owyhee, first of all. And because you mentioned birding, the birding on the Owyhee is remarkable. And then the Rogue. The Rogue is a trip that anybody can do. It goes through the Wild Rogue Wilderness. I didn't mention it in the Wildest river trips because, like, it's a fairly straightforward trip to do, unlike the ones I feel like I like the challenges sometimes, like the getting there and the hiking. But the Rogue is a trip that a kid as young as 7 can do, grandparents can do, and everybody loves the Rogue. The Rogue is a slam dunk, and definitely one of our national treasures. Another good one is the John Day. John Day is great. The Deschutes, we have so many resources, but the two that come to mind first are the Owyhee and the Rogue.
Right. Erik, curious how Oregon Wild and American Whitewater work together.
Yeah, we work together on a pretty regular basis. At the coalition that I mentioned earlier, American Whitewater is one of our favorite partners in that coalition. One of the photos I showed of the South Umpqua River with that kayaker going over in the beginning, that was a photo they took. So yeah, we're happy to work with anyone and everyone. Some people are easier to work with than others. Those folks over at American Whitewater are among my favorite to work with. So yeah, good to have them as members of our Rivers Coalition in Oregon.
Zach, how many cases of Giardia make you a true river guide?
I've never had it. So if it's more than 0, then I'm not a true river guide. But
a couple of questions that are also in the kind of intro. What kind of training is required for river rafting, starting gear, and good kind of starting places for people that are, maybe into not a hike in or more than an afternoon or one-day trip?
I mean, that's a tough thing. I don't feel like, so I can plug what we do. We do offer beginner level training. It's something we've offered recently. We do rowing classes on the Rogue, for example, and teach people how to row boats. But there's not a really good way to get training to get into this on your own. And it's something we think about a lot here in our company, how we can offer that. I don't have a really good answer for that. A lot of people say take a swiftwater rescue class, but that's more about after a problem happens and less about how to prevent problems. So right now, I would suggest starting on easy rivers and joining a club like the Oregon Whitewater Association. It's a Portland-based club. I'm a member. I go to meetings when I can. They're wonderful people. They'll be happy to take you under their wing. They do safety courses. And so, I would suggest getting to the Oregon Whitewater Association. And in terms of learning basic safety, it's kind of right now on the job. There's not a lot of really good basic safety classes, but it's something that I have been working on and thinking about. Did I answer that question?
So that would be a good resource for identifying rivers, where to put in, take out rafting regulations, or where would people go for that?
There's not super awesome places. American Whitewater has a good website. It's all user generated. There's good information there, but a lot of the river descriptions are more oriented towards like harder stuff. And so it sort of depends where you live. If you live in Portland area, the lower Clackamas is a really good place to sort of get your feet wet. In Southern Oregon, the Rogue, the easy sections of the Rogue, what we call the recreational section, that's a good place. Looking for like class 1 and 2 stuff, and it depends on the craft. I love inflatable kayaks because almost anybody can get an inflatable kayak and do class 1 and 2. Whereas if you take a hard shell, you might struggle. And with a raft, there's some issues. So with an inflatable kayak, there are some class 1 and 2 places you could get started. That's a tough question. I'm sorry to have a really vague answer. That's a really good question, and I wish I had a better answer for
that. Erik, one question. I grew up in Virginia and have always been blown away by the many beautiful rivers there, but somehow no Virginia rivers have wild and scenic designation. What can Virginia learn from Oregon to earn wild and scenic designation for some of the state's rivers?
Gosh, that's a good question.
That's a tough one.
I think there's ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, it takes an act of Congress to protect a river and designate it as wild and scenic. And so, with that, knowing that is your end goal of how you get there, it starts with a lot of education and outreach. If you start out with the first river you're proposing being super controversial, that might be a hard way to do it, but maybe that's the only choice. That's the river that most needs protection. But a lot of background education for local folks, the county commissioners, the city council, any organizations that identify with that area, building support grassroots style that way. and working your way up to Congress and the local members there would be the way I would do it. It's interesting, taking a step back on that question. In Oregon, we have a very green reputation here, and it's one we have failed to live up to on the environmental front on a lot of issues. So our logging rules are very lax, but how much wilderness have we protected compared to other neighboring states? We're way behind everyone. When it comes to designating wild and scenic rivers, we're ahead of the pack. We've actually done quite well at that. There's still a lot of work to be done, but we have more designated wild and scenic rivers in Oregon than any other state except for Alaska. And ironically, that's one of the things Senator Wyden has observed and mentioned, wanting to be the leader in the country as one of the reasons to consider new designations in Oregon. So yeah, the more you can do in Virginia, we'll call it a healthy competition, but hopefully those are some good starting points there.
I mean, I want to add to that too. It's much easier to designate a river wild and scenic if it's on public lands. It's very difficult on private land. And so if you look at Virginia, I'm guessing not a lot of Virginia is on public lands. And so to designate a river that's not on public lands requires what's called a partnership river, way more work than if it's on public land. So part of it is just the nature of being in the West and having more public land.
Yep. A few people have sent in some more resources for people, referring more folks to the American Whitewater website. And then also Tim Palmer, a friend of everyone here, he has a field guide to Oregon rivers that includes lots of trips and tips for finding easy rivers.
And Tim's book has a remarkable number of the class 1 and 2 rivers. Not just, I should have mentioned Tim's book. That was my huge mistake. It also has ways you can hike them and enjoy them different ways than paddling. And so Tim knows a lot more of the secret class 1 and 2 runs out there.
We are a little bit over time now, so I'm just going to wrap up one more question, which I think is a really good one. And then if people have other questions for Erik, you can find his address on our website. And then I sent around with the invite Zach's website, but I will also send that around in the follow-up email tomorrow. That will also have a link to this recorded presentation so that you can share it, watch it, zero in on information you might have missed. But the last question is, what are some key ways for us to visit these places responsibly and to support the local economies around them?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Zach, I'll let you take a stab at this, but I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it. I think the answer to that question is different today than it would have been 6 months ago. I think there are a lot of new rules and restrictions and guidelines on a lot of communities that are near public lands right now, not wanting a whole lot of outsiders coming to visit their community and potentially be bringing the coronavirus. So it's a whole new set of rules. There's plenty, you can read different articles on that online. But once we're back to normal, maybe we can focus on that for a moment, shall we? Lots of great ways to responsibly visit, and that's, being, stopping at local businesses, not just blowing through those gateway towns, being respectful, not speeding. There's leave no trace. Don't leave a mess for the locals behind, whether that's on the trail or in town. Or at the campground if you're staying at a nearby campground. So those are a few things. Zach, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think with, again, an environment we're in now, respecting closures, and if you get to a trailhead or a river that's busy, go somewhere else. We don't want to overcrowd places right now, so, and stay in your community. And so I would love to go run the Rogue this week. I don't live in Grants Pass, so I'm not going to go run the Rogue this week. So I'm gonna stay in my community. If a trailhead's packed right now, move on to a different one, or unfortunately, go for a walk from your house. It's hard time to recreate responsibly everywhere we want to go. Outside of this environment, I would really encourage people to disperse geographically throughout the state. I feel like the 7 wonders get a lot of attention. I live in Hood River. The gorge is just inundated. But if you go down to Southern Oregon, there's a lot of spectacular places to visit that aren't called Crater Lake. Or go out to the Owyhee country. In that place, there's always room for tons of people. The John Day country is spectacular. It's not overcrowded. The Wallowas are unreal, and the Wallowas are not just Joseph. There's a huge area around that, all the Wallowas that are unbelievable. So I would just encourage people to go see the places that aren't the normal Instagram stops, and find new places off the beaten path. The Blue Mountains are a place in Oregon that most people don't even know exist, and just really cool. So for me, it'd be geographic distribution throughout the state.
Yeah, one more quick add-on, Aaron, sorry, that I know really stresses some local communities is if people aren't safe and get lost or need to be rescued, search and rescue programs through the sheriff's office or volunteer, usually it's oftentimes both, those don't come free, and a lot of times you might be in a small community with a small budget for that type of program, and if you go out and you aren't safe and you aren't careful in planning your route and getting lost, that can add an undue burden on those local communities. And so, that's even more so true now, but even under good times, that's always an issue. So be safe. Some of those basics: be safe, don't be a jerk. We'll get you a long way with making friends with the locals.
And we'll end on that sage advice: don't be a jerk. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. Again, I'll email some more information around tomorrow, and hopefully see everyone next week. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks. Bye.